Hello and welcome to my campfire series. Today we're going to be talking about some spooky stories that occurred to people when they least expected it. Today's episode is called What Did I Just See? I hope you enjoy, and let's delve right in. My boyfriend and I had just moved from San Diego up to Santa Ana, and we got an apartment in a huge complex that was 20 years old. There were 2-story buildings, so we either had a bottom or a top floor, and we ended up on the top floor. It was a solid little place, and for the first few months we were living there, it was great. Super small, but great. I noticed one day while hanging up laundry on my side of the closet that there was one of those little attic cutouts that you can push aside and go up into. I joked to my boyfriend that it was like the grunge, and there was a demon up there. That night I was going to bed before him, and I was laying there, and he came into the room and said something as he was swinging the door shut. He looked at the closet, up as he was looking towards the attic hole I joked about earlier. And he goes, "You can come out now, she's alone," with a maniacal laugh, and that's where it all started. I kid you not, from that night something started, and for the most part it wasn't threatening, but legit creepy, and kind of annoying at times. The most frequent was knocking all over the place in the house. We would be sleeping and I'd wake up and lay there with my eyes open, hearing knocking on the ceiling and then on the corner and at the end of the bed. Boom, 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 boom. The first time I heard it, my boyfriend stirred a bit, and I looked over and he had his eyes open too. I asked him if he was hearing it, and he said yeah. He had heard it for a while but didn't want to wake me. This happened 20-30 times throughout the year we lived there, and it was in the random spots all over the house. We would hear it in the living room, the bathroom, and the closet walls. The wall that the headboard was on, everywhere, very random and loud enough it would wake us up. We tried taping it with this shitty little video camera, but it was an old camera, and it would never run the whole night, etc., etc. Basically, we didn't want to pump money into it, and keep a phone recording for a whole night wasn't realistic. Anyways, most of the time I was not scared of whatever it was, because I was also having dreams about it. In my dreams, it was an older man who was always shirtless, seemed confused, and every time I'd see him in my dreams, I had a few dreams about aliens in my house, and they would watch me sleep or hide around corners, but there were a handful of times I was scared and felt like I was being watched, and really uneasy to the point I left the house until my boyfriend came home. I had a ton of problems with sleep paralysis at this house too. At least once a week, I would wake up and have to deal with feeling stuck and seeing things moving around me, and before I'd eventually break out of it and get up. During the sleep paralysis, I could feel someone trying to crawl onto the bed with me, and it didn't feel like succubus sex threatening, but like they were trying to pull me off the bed and hurt me. You know how if someone is crawling onto the bed, a pet or whatever, you can feel the mattress depress and a little movement from it. That's what it would feel around my ankles, like something pressing right next to my feet and legs. The worst episode was one morning. I didn't have to get up, and my boyfriend had gotten up already. I just assumed he was still getting ready in the bathroom or something, because I could hear movement, but since I was laying facing the wall on my stomach, I was operating just off noises. I was trying to keep sleeping, but I could hear that soft padding sound of feet walking across the carpet and rustling of clothing. I had my eyes closed and I felt something press on the mattress near my foot. And I opened my eyes a little thinking he was saying bye, but I saw a hand that had fingers with one too many knuckles. It was too pale and it was sticking out of a black long-sleeved robe thing. So yeah, no, it wasn't my boyfriend. Its hands moved up to my side table and started fiddling with stuff on it, moving my phone, bobby pins, necklace, just touching stuff calmly. It scared the shit out of me. I pretended to be asleep and not to move, but I would peek out to see what it was doing and kept thinking was like a demon or an alien. After sufficiently touching all my stuff next to my bed for a few minutes, I could hear its feet on the carpet shuffle away, and I waited, and eventually turned over and sat up, and it was gone. I have no idea what the hell it was, but it shook me up because I started crying and called my boyfriend. I got salt and sage, and from that night I did protection rituals just about every night before I went to bed, telling whatever it was that it wasn't allowed in my house, that it was my house, and I didn't want to have it there. The sleep paralysis episodes never stopped, but the knocking died down a lot after, and I started doing that regularly. Eventually we moved out, and back into our parents to save money, for an out-of-state move. The first night at my mom's house, I was sleeping on the couch, and the old man came to my bedside. moved my bangs off my face. I could feel his fingers brush my hair away from my eyes, and then walked out of the room, and I never saw him again. I have not had another sleep paralysis episode since then. This next story is called What Happened to Her. My father's cousin David was a coroner and a mortician for many years. Cousin David was a calm man, very pleasant and not easily ruffled, so when he told me this story to me, for the first time, I had chills. David, like all of my dad's family, was devoted, Pentecostal, holy rolling, speaking in tongues, the whole bit, one evening after work. Still a single man, so this would be the mid-1960s, heads to a summer tent revival meeting. It's northeast Arkansas, it's August, and it's 100 degrees, even at dusk. At this revival service is a faith healer, and he is preaching up some fire and brimstone. The tent is packed, and by the time David gets there, they're all pounding the piano and singing like mad. People are dancing in the spirit and jumping up and down, praising the Lord. The faith healer is at the front of all of this, laying hands on people brought forward. Old people, crippled people, sick people are brought forward and prayed over, loudly prayed over, and then sent back, supposedly healed. Amongst all this ruckus, David notices a disturbance in the back. An older couple is bringing a young teenage girl against her will forward to the front of the tent. The girl is dragging her feet and crying, and the couple are having trouble holding her, so two large men came to help. As they pass, the tent begins to quiet. When they reach the front, the man speaks to the pastor/faith healer, who nods and begins to pray, and the teenage girl is seated in a chair. The faith healer exhorts everyone to pray hard, and they lays his hands on the girl, calling for the demon to be casted out. My eyes rolled a bit as David told the story, but he continued, sober as a judge and serious as a heart attack. As the prayers grew more fervent, the girl began to thrash back and forth and howl like a wild cat. Her voice didn't even sound human. It was deep and echoed as if she was speaking in a barrel, and she began to howl and bark at the healer as he demanded to know the name of the demon possessing the girl. By this time, 4 adult men were needed to hold the girl down. The audience continued to pray, and dancing has stopped. Most were praying silently or staring slack-jawed. A few ladies surrounded the girl's mother, who was rocking back and forth and crying. At last, the healer asked the demon his name. The girl, in her deep, barrel-graveling voice, replied, "Never tell you our name." The healer demanded again, "Are you Satan?" The girl's eyes, which had rolled back into her head, came forward and fixed on the healer with such hate. David said you could almost see it from across the room. She bared her teeth and said, "No, but I can get him here for you." And that's when Cousin David, who had seen mangled car wrecks, burned victims, and more than one victim in pieces following farm equipment malfunctions, noped right out of there and went straight home. We have all heard stories like this and have seen it in movies and pop culture, but when you're there in person and feel the dread would make the strongest man shudder. This next story is called I Felt It Watching Me. My sister once dated this guy whose parents kept this little carousel thing up at the top of the big dish cabinet. I assume it was for Christmas, but it kind of fit there, so they left it. Even though it was pretty high up, if you walked by, it was triggered somehow and went off. Then it started to die, and it was moving really slow, and the music was kind of deranged, so they took the batteries out and just never replaced them. Every time you'd walk by after that, it still went off, super slow and super deranged. Then it started going off when you were sitting on the couch, way across the room, in the living room, not even moving. To set the scene, it was a completely open room, and so you could see the entire dining room and living room from either side. This same house also had a strange basement. I've never had issues with basements, except for this one. It was also two-sided, as half of it was the laundry area and the other half was the sitting area, I guess, that was separated by a thin wall. Every single time we'd be down there, I felt watched, and the hairs on my skin stood up. I thought it was just me, until my sister's boyfriend eventually moved down there, and she said the same thing. It was not pleasant to sleep down there at night, especially since they were not allowed to leave the laundry light on, and there was no door to that room, so it looked like a giant black void at night. I'm not the only one who has felt watched in that house. We never did see what it was, but we would hear noises at night, and almost like you could feel the heaviness in the room. Wasn't the only occurrence. I also went to my dad's house when I was real young to play with their kids while the adults hung out. I remember going up to the playroom. They had a setup for the girl my age, and we both sat down to play with a big plastic dollhouse. The one where you could move the staircase up and down, kinda like an attic ladder. We were laughing and having a good old time until her mom walked in. I turned and said something along the lines of, "Hi Beth, and I are hungry. Can we get a snack?" And she looked at me like I had two heads and asked where I'd seen her because she's been looking for her because it's time for her medicine. Obviously being confused, I turned around and poof, she's gone. They all thought it was cute because I was little and obviously was playing with my imaginary friend. Yeah, imaginary friend. That looks exactly like your living, breathing child. I later asked my friend why she hid from her mom earlier, and I asked if it was because the medicine is gross. And she had no clue what I was talking about and told me she wasn't hiding. She was outside on the tire swing, playing. So who did I see? And what did I see? This next story is a long one, and it's called Why I'm Never Going Into the Woods Again. About a year ago I moved my family, and I too, a home away out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest, and after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details, and I think it will paint a clear picture in the end, so please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can be almost deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in the car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as if I'm her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and looked up at me like, nope, so I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to the car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from the car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached into my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of the hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattled. At first, I thought it was the rabbit that had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where it was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock about the size of a cantaloupe landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into the shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said whoever this was is about to be shot. After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was one of the local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me nope back to my door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned and drew my gun again, expecting something right there, but again, there was nothing. A couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard the panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet it sounds like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 p.m. and my wife and I enjoyed listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me growing up in Oregon loved the rain, and for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day and then it would be done dry for the rest of the year. For my wife who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching it rain. So for us, this is an enjoyable experience, except for this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No." "What did you hear?" I replied. She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said there was it again. I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended, and that I didn't hear anything, and said, "No, I'm positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and he got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there besides." I don't hear anything. She then stands up and says, wow, he's really crying out there for help. I need to go look for him. Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she's absolutely creeped out by the woods, and she wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during the daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, I've been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here. At this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that this is the time she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, what if there is some child out there lost in the woods? I said, well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up with Christmas tree lights is nil. She then says, I know, but what if it's a kid? Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking towards the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand and said, no, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside. Then she complies and we both go inside. I didn't know what it was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door of our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so they can't open it without us. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out the front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive, on the side of our house. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, seriously? You just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate? She then looks out into the woods and says, see, there it is again. Again, I can't hear anything. I'm starting to get a little freaked out at this point, but what I did notice is that it is completely silent outside, again. I told her just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods, outside our house, is slim, and that she needed to get back into the house. She said, what if someone left a baby out there? I said, well, if that were true, I would hear it too. Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out front on the porch. It's early evening, I had just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around in his little car in front of the house. Now he loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we were talking, we both keeping an eye on him, as a neighbor drives by and stops and says hi for a second. This interaction took about 8 seconds, and then we said, how are things? We said good, and told us that he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be the one of their teachers at school, and we said, okay, great, and he drove off. I looked over to where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name, and I ran over to the side of the house, and I could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back into the direction of the woods, kept trying to tell me something. I looked off into the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel or something, and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back to the front of the house, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset and that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, and most 3-year-old boys are. Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night, and I heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlights came on, but I could see nothing. Now the weird part about this is our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlights that were on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of my deck and shined my light around the yard, and I could see nothing. Things started to feel eerie. There's also been times where we were sitting in the house. As I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she says she swears she heard me call her. She said that it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in the recliner. The important part of this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard door was open behind her. Now our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground, and it's like a balcony as it has no staircase outside. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy. But as you will see, I think all of this tied into the final moment where things are revealed. The next night, my daughter and I were taking the dogs out for one last bathroom break before bed when I heard some dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she's about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet and looked like it did in a single jump. This thing moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my daughter. It jumped behind the car out of the line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back towards the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up to the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying, "No, no, no," over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say is that they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that their pupils looked gray, like the way it looks when you go blind. She said it was really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again, and took a step down from the stairs. As she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside." I went and locked the door. It looked like a tall-shaped being. It was really tall, and looked ominous as hell. The next morning, we did a height comparison to see the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it puts its head around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I didn't know what that thing was. After doing some research, I think that thing was a glimmerman/crawler. I looked to see if there was any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. Now, I originally posted this on the Bigfoot Reddit page, but after doing a bunch of research, I believe this thing belongs here. We were very scared at this point. One of the things that what makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. It's very paranormal. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it had to play back like a communication. So when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs it had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, and he had recently fell and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to recently. And it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my daughter had said that night was she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said it felt like that thing was communicating with her. Somehow it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over the past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is just down the road towards the lake there's a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of a forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped owned land, and one of these trees there is a large old sign that says "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Whatever this screamer thing is, we are not going to stay around to find out. That story definitely had my hair standing on the back of my head. Let's delve into a few more scary stories. This next story is called Little Hands. I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did as a teen. Recounting a true event, other houses on her street had strange things going on too. A few homes away from her lived a family. One night, the daughter went to bed with a bad headache. The next day, she was dead. She passed away from an aneurysm. After her funeral, the family went away to get their minds off the tragedy, and the father asked my uncle and my mom's brother to check on their pets. My mom and dad, who were dating at the time, went with him. My mother had heard there was a grand piano and she wanted to play it. My dad was studying to be a veterinarian. After entering the house, my uncle and my father headed to the basement to see the animals, and my mother went to play the piano on the ground floor. She was playing it when she felt something brush her ankles. She thought a cat must have left the basement and walked past her. She kept playing and then she felt it again. She looked under the piano and saw nothing. When she started again, she felt hands clasp her legs tightly. She dashed to the basement door, called my uncle and father, and waited for them. Back outside, my uncle could tell my mom was rattled and asked what was wrong. She told him what happened, and he turned white. He told her the daughter who had died used to play a game with her father. When he played the piano, she'd crawl underneath, grab his ankles, and push his feet up and down on the pedals. I don't know about you, but that gave me chills. This next story is called I Don't Believe in Ghosts, But... A few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It went on a recall. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I had been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into my bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space lay fractured into two pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there, for sure, I thought. I emailed pictures to the landlord asking if anyone had been up there, with an undertone of annoyance. She said she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called and she explained that her last two tenants had said the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. I felt like someone was rubbing his or her hand on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There is no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw the new board covering the hole was broken into two. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped, but I heard something else, whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over, "It's your turn. It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet Bungie Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sorts of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited there until the sun came up. Then I saw people walking their dogs. This comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out, and I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet, and I took him out, washing him and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m. I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. This terrified me, and something tried to kill my dog. I stayed in the apartment for another 2 months and barely slept, unable to explain what had happened. I heard the whispers on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live somewhere else now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about the stuff that was going on there. Forget it. It's their problem now. I'm never going back to that place ever again. This last story is called The Red Lady of Huntingdon College. Here is a story that dates back to the 1910s, but almost any student at Huntingdon College in Montgomery, Alabama should recognize it. That's because the events that led up to this are said to have actually happened. As the story goes, in the 1910s, a young woman who was new to the school was known for the love of the color red. Sadly, she was also known for being strange and a loner. As the first term got underway, the young woman grew increasingly isolated. Eventually, she took her life by slashing her wrists. Her body was discovered in a red gown, drenched in blood. From then on, students and faculty have been reporting sightings of a young woman dressed all in red. She appeared all around the college campus. The figure dwelling in perpetual isolation is often cited as a reminder of the importance of being kind to one's peers. These truly have been interesting stories we have explored today. Whether they are true or not, something happened to these individuals, enough to change their perception and their life completely. We know not what lurks in the dark, so we must be prepared for anything, and to be honest about our experiences, because what we share may help someone who finds themselves in similar circumstances. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope to delve into more unexplained stories, and if you have any suggestions, please let me know what you'd like to hear. Bye for now.